we're happy to have you here today. I just want to take a chance to introduce myself. I'm Jerry Beckman. I'm the Assistant Head of School for Academic Affairs, and I have the wonderful opportunity to work with the Randolph Community Network, specifically the academic ambassadors. And one of our responsibilities is to try to work with parents and really come up with topics for parent education. And we're really starting to re-engage in that post-COVID again and try to offer more parent education topics like today. You may remember previously this semester, we invited the Social Institute to our campus. They spent time with our middle school students, our upper school students, as well as our faculty. They had planned a parent presentation, but the weather got us that night. So we tried to do a webinar approach, and we had technical difficulties, but they have prepared a webinar for us now. And if you look back at this week's weekly bulletin, you'll see a link to that webinar. It's about 50 minutes long. I've actually watched it myself. I think you'll find a lot of great parent resources as you help your family navigate social media and other technology. I think that'll be very beneficial for you. So today we have the ins and outs of anxiety. We have our three wonderful counselors with us that are going to talk with you. I think it's going to be an informal presentation where you can ask questions along the way, so we encourage that. But I want to introduce our counselors. Vanessa Robinson is our lower school counselor. Savannah Shorts, our middle school counselor, and Leslie Sheelord is our upper school candidate. So I'm going to turn the program over to them. Thank you.
Hi, I'm glad you guys are here. It may take me a few minutes for my voice to settle down because this is very anxiety-provoking for me. So bear with me, please. If you want to know what anxiety looks like in certain settings, I'm showing you one. But I am really glad you are here, I think. And I've been here 24 years. I've lost count. It's been a long time. But I think this is our largest group to ever come to a parent ed in all of those years. So it's pretty exciting. And glad to see so many dads out here as well. It's always good to have that perspective as well. So I'm just going to get started. We each have a section that we're going to do. And if you have a question, let me know. And I'll do my best to answer that. What we know in an educational setting is that it is very important for a student to be in a state where they're able to learn. And research has shown that learning cannot take place when a student feels physically unsafe or emotionally insecure. So we want to provide an environment, obviously, that provides those two things for them so that they can have the most learning they're able to get. And if they're experiencing negative emotions, especially stronger negative emotions, the limbic system does kick in, the fight, flight, or freeze system, and that will take over and not allow them to get the information that is being presented to them. And so we want to be able to recognize the kids that are having these kind of issues, help them with coping skills to get them able to be in the classroom and get everything out that you all are sending them here for. Stress and anxiety are similar, but not just alike. Stress is something everybody experiences, as well as anxiety. It's a natural response to a specific challenge. Usually it's pretty short term. We can have some acute long-term stress, but mostly it's short term. It makes you feel nervous, angry. Sometimes you can tell that a child is feeling stressed out by their mood. Stress can be overwhelming. And the one thing that makes stress different than anxiety is it can have a positive effect on our motivation. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. Anxiety can be caused from the stress. It can be a sustained issue. Sometimes anxiety comes without any reason. We can't identify what is causing a child to be anxious, and it does not appear that it has changed, that they are worrying about anything specifically. They just have a feeling of anxiety that is affecting them and their ability to function in the classroom. Usually their worry and fear is out of proportion to whatever a problem might be if we've identified something. It is overwhelming and doesn't necessarily make sense or is logical. And that is the thing with anxiety is very rarely can you make a logical explanation for the amount of fear that they're having or the reason that they may be having it. And it will continue even if whatever they identified as the threat is already fixed, they may still feel anxious. It will cause impairment in their functioning. So here we have the performance anxiety curve, and this is where stress can be a helpful tool. We know that students who are too relaxed are not at their optimal learning. They're not feeling the need to do something. They're pretty, they may be a little bored. They might just be like, oh, I'd rather do something else. But an optimal amount of stress, which can be hard to identify for individuals, is where the best learning occurs. So enough pressure that I need to do this, but not so much that then their brain shuts down and they're no longer learning either. Everybody is different in where that amount of stress is, and trying to figure that out, it can be a challenge for you all at home as well as us in the classroom. But stress is not necessarily always bad. Your view of stress is also important. So if you believe that stress is a negative thing and a bad thing, then it is going to affect you in that way. If you believe that stress is a necessary part of life, a motivator, then you will be able to use that to your advantage. So for instance, me believing like, oh, this nervousness that I'm having is necessary to make me get up there and do as well as I can. So versus, oh, this is going to kill me and I'm probably not going to do this at all. So how you view it and how you help your child view stress is important. We have a lot of high functioning anxiety here. It is what we see here, hard worker. They are paying attention to detail, can be perfectionistic, organized, well prepared, calm under pressure. When they get home, this is what you might see. Overthinking, overwhelmed, cannot say no, burnt out, fear of failure, full of self-doubt. And we're like, are we talking about the same child? What we're seeing is they're doing really great. So it's important that we're in communication. And again, we might believe we have enough of the stress on them, and we're not realize that maybe it has gone to too much. These are the types of anxiety disorders in school in children. So general anxiety disorder, which can be related to many different things. Panic disorder, which involves a sudden onset of a panic attack, reason not always known. Separation anxiety, which is interesting because the average age of separation anxiety in studies that have been done is 11, not 5 or 6. So often we do see kindergarten and first graders have that issue. Sometimes the kindergarten will be great. First grade, they will come and all of a sudden, I'll be like, I kind of remember this from last year. It was a long year. You know, this, I know what I'm in for. And so sometimes we see first graders start to have some separation anxiety that we didn't see before. That's not terribly unusual. And then on occasion, we have seen some middle schoolers. They usually have more of an anxious personality, probably had some separation anxiety when they were younger, but something when their hormones kick in, sometimes that separation anxiety kicks in again, and they might start not wanting to go to a friend's house or not spend the night or go on overnight field trips and be worried about being without their parents. Again, in the middle school, early middle school years, really. Social anxiety disorder, which is more, average age is around 14, and that is when peer relationships become more important. Obsessive compulsive disorder, which is you can see a lot of perfectionism, this isn't good enough, I have to do it over, or repeating behaviors. Selective mutism, this generally starts in preschool or early elementary. Specific phobias, I can't go to recess, there's bees outside. Or somebody has vomited and now I don't want to go to school or go to the lunchroom or phobias that we see here. Post-traumatic stress disorder, if they've experienced something traumatic, went through, like a tornado or a house fire or a car wreck or that sort of thing, we might see some of that. And agoraphobia, which is the fear of just being out in open places, in school, and a lot of school avoidance can happen with that. So anxiety disorders are the most common diagnosed childhood disorders. More so than ADHD or learning disabilities, depression, anxiety is the number one. Amazingly, 1 in 3 kids can meet criteria by the age of 18. That is huge to me. Does not mean they've all been diagnosed with that, but they can meet the criteria of it during a specific time by the age of 18. The adolescent brain is particularly vulnerable to stress. That is all of the changes that are occurring in that, in the hormones. And boys and girls are equally affected up until adolescence, and then girls double the boys in anxiety disorders. Early intervention is really important. It is necessary for them to learn how to cope with stress and anxiety. And the earlier you start, the better able they are going to be able to handle it. As you all know, stress does not go away. It's a lifelong fun thing we all get to deal with. Knowing how to deal with it in a healthy way is really important. So if you see that your child is struggling with that, please let the school know and talk to us about your concerns. Little bit. Okay, so thank you all. Savannah's going to talk.
Hi everyone, I'm Savannah Short. I'm a middle school counselor. Thank you, Vanessa. I'm going to kind of talk more about what anxiety can look and feel like, when it's time to maybe get some support, and what's normal type of anxiety throughout developmental stages. So I think I might have lost a slide. I think I just lost a slide. Did you print it out? Sorry, everyone. No, there's one before that, but now I'm having trouble remembering what it said. I think we just, it was just talking about anxiety presents very differently for different people, right? So 2 people with a generalized anxiety disorder diagnosis, it's going to look different from person to person. So we have those people with high functioning anxiety who might, put on a great face all day, and we're never the wiser that anything's going on inside. Whereas you have some people who are more outwardly expressive about the anxiety they're feeling, whether that's just a difference in personality or just a difference in the severity of the anxiety that they're experiencing. The slide also talked about some physical symptoms that people might experience. So that's going to be things like, your heart starting to race a little bit, and having trouble catching your breath, things like that. And that can lead to what we call a panic attack, and that can be a really scary experience for a person. I think if any of us have ever experienced one, you probably can remember it and remember that feeling. People will often end up in the emergency department, thinking that they're having a cardiac event, when in fact it was a panic attack. But it seems like it's very life-threatening and very real to that person who's experiencing it. Some other physical symptoms, just kind of racing thoughts, things like that you might feel, but you can't always see that are happening. So hands trembling, sweating, things like that. So just important to kind of note those things and what they can feel like. So, if your child's saying, my stomach's hurting, we all know about the butterflies that we can experience sometimes, and that's normal. But when our anxiety is severe, it can manifest that way, stomach hurting, headache, things like that. Next, I wanted to talk about normative anxiety and fears through developmental stages. So it can be really hard to determine, okay, is this what my child is going through, is this normal, or is this something that I should be concerned about? And it can be hard to determine that, because throughout the different developmental stages, our kids are going to go through things and have fears that are relatively normal. So just to touch on those a little bit, so infancy, toddlerhood, it's very normal to experience shyness, anxiety with adults, specific fears, so that's thunder, lightning, fire, things like that. And if those persist, for a long period of time, that's where we could get into the specific phobias like Vanessa was talking about. But for the most part, in those ages, that's going to be relatively normal, and then that's when separation anxiety could begin, and then that's where it's the kind of normative area for that to begin. And that'll also go down into to lower school as well. So if there are tears in the first few days of kindergarten, that's totally normal. Vanessa can speak more to that in her division. But if it's to the point where, we're crying every single day on the way to school and we're in 3rd grade, it might be time to kind of have a larger conversation about, maybe this is separation anxiety. So like I said, that'll go into lower school as well. Fear of death and dying, that's a normal anxiety and fear, because they're learning what death is, and that is a scary thing. So it's normal to feel some anxiety around that. Specific objects, so it can be imaginary. I'm afraid that there's a monster under my bed, right? That's normal. So if mom or dad goes into the room, checks under the bed, there's not a monster, you're safe, and then they're able to kind of regulate and calm down, that's normal. Maybe when it's time to be concerned would be, first thing in the morning, we're sitting at breakfast and we're worried about going to sleep that night because of the monster that we're scared of. That makes sense. Fear of germs and illness, that's normal. I also wanted to note here too, it's important to remember what's going on in our world. So during the pandemic, a lot of people had heightened anxiety about the fear of germs and illness. So that would be more normative at that time, but especially in this age range. Fear of natural disasters or traumatic events, very normal. If we're needing to go down in the basement to shelter in place because there's a tornado warning, it's normal to feel that anxiety. But if it's the middle of a summer day and there's not a cloud in the sky, but they feel like there's an imminent threat of a tornado coming, that might be time to have a conversation. Next is school anxiety. And so school anxiety can start, as obviously it's going to start as we get older and we start to get grades. So higher grades in lower school, middle school, and just as the stakes continue to get higher, that anxiety might become higher. But like Vanessa was talking about with the difference between stress and anxiety, some of that stress is important. And it can help motivate us, and if you have a positive view of it, it can definitely be helpful. But when it's to the point where it's debilitating is when it might be time to seek some support. So I always think about perfectionism with that. So we have a lot of high achieving students at our school, but if it's to the point where a student is having a panic attack or having anxiety because they got 99 and not a 100, that might be time for a conversation. Another thing with performance, it's important to also, with all of these, think about, is the emotion that my child is experiencing appropriate for what the situation is, right? So if you're in the car on the way to school and your child says, oh, I have a presentation today and I did not prepare at all, and they start to freak out a little bit, that's appropriate, right? We might be more concerned if they're just like, we'll figure it out. But that's going to be an appropriate response to that. On the other hand, if there's a student who is very prepared for their presentation and they're still experiencing that amount of anxiety, that could be cause for concern. Or if they finish their presentation and just the anticipation, thinking about the next time I might have to present in front of my class, and that causes a lot of anxiety. If that makes sense, even if there's nothing really necessarily coming up. And then that, like I said, As the stakes get higher, especially getting into college and things, that can persist as well, and be normal. Middle school and upper school as well, that fear of peer rejection and social anxiety. So you'll see in middle school, that's when that trend kind of happens where, the kids are pulling away from mom and dad and seeking their approval, and more so wanting that approval from their peers. And so that's normal to experience that. And it's, again, is the emotion my child feeling appropriate for what they're going through? Yes, middle schoolers are dramatic. And they're going to think that the sky is falling when they're in a social conflict, social situation. And for them, it really does feel like that, right? And it's important to let them feel those uncomfortable emotions. But when it's persisting and when it doesn't, when we're not able to bounce back, I guess, is when there might be cause for concern there. Okay, and then when is it time to seek support? And then Leslie's going to talk more about those specific supports. So I know a lot of these can seem very kind of self-explanatory, but I think it's good to talk about. So when the amount of anxiety is overwhelming and interferes with school, friendships, and other aspects of life. So overwhelming, they feel like it's going to feel like this forever, don't see a light at the end of the tunnel kind of things. So when the fear or worry is upsetting and seems out of their control, so if they're experiencing panic attacks, that is definitely cause for concern and would be reason to seek support if it's overwhelming and just feels genuinely like it's out of their control. Next, when it's affecting sleep, and I'll go ahead and add probably appetite to that as well. Sleep and eating, those are on the bottom tier of our hierarchy of needs. So if anxiety is so high that it's affecting your child's ability to sleep or affecting their appetite, that's going to affect everything else going on in their life. So that's important to take note of. Next, when you notice a drastic shift in mood or behavior. So you know your child better than anyone else. So if you notice that something is off, that might be time to ask some questions about what might be going on. And sometimes you'll see things at home before we see things at school. Like Vanessa talked about with our high functioning anxiety. Those kids are ones that sometimes can fly under our radar because we see them at school and they seem happy and they're smiling and they're getting good grades, and but then they get home and sometimes we'll get calls from parents. Do you know what's going on with my child? They come home and they're just exhausted and they just sleep, or they get in the car and they just crumble. And that could be some anxiety, and the term we use is masking. So sounds like what it is. They're putting on a mask all day long to try to make everyone think I'm okay. Don't let anybody see me sweat. I'm doing everything I need to do. And then as soon as they're home or where they perceive to be safe, they just crumble. So what's really important, and I'll reiterate what Vanessa said again, is communication. So if you notice these things at home, talking to your child's teacher, advisor, division counselor about what you're seeing, and we can kind of compare notes. And when we're all on the same page and all in communication, that's when we're in the best position to support the students. And the last one, very self-explanatory, when your child says they need support. Sometimes as adults, it can be difficult to understand maybe why your child is feeling what they're feeling, because maybe you've never experienced anxiety yourself, or also as adults we have the perspective to understand like this isn't that deep of an issue, but to them it feels really real. And so when they say they need support, listen to them and don't just shut it down. Because odds are, they've been thinking about this for a while. Like, think about yourself and your willingness to ask for help, even when you were growing up. It's not something that comes naturally, or sometimes it's something that comes naturally to ask for that help when we need it. So you can almost rest assured 9 times out of 10, if they're coming to you saying that they need support, they've thought about it, right? And now they're being very vulnerable and coming to you and saying, I think I need support. So 1, listening, believing what they're feeling. 2, asking questions, and then 3, sometimes also we jump to, wanting to solve their problem for them, and, what can I do to help, and that's great, but sometimes just asking, what can I do, what do you need from me, that will help you in just offering whatever support that they do need, and obviously we're here for y'all to collaborate on that, and we can provide resources and everything. Yeah. I think that is my, now Leslie's going to talk about some more supports.
So nice to see everybody here today. I know we've got a lot of lower and middle school families, and I love that because that means that we are on track to provide some early intervention, like Vanessa said, so that when these students do make that transition to the upper school, that they are getting what they need. That transition to the upper school is a huge transition for them, and so that is what we look for with the freshmen. And just sort of providing support throughout their high school years. So what can parents do? This is really important. I love when parents partner with us and communicate with us and want to know exactly what it is that they can do, because it does take everybody working together to help support these students. So first of all, modeling healthy ways of managing your own anxiety, right? So taking care of yourself, exercising, doing the things. Their kids really are looking at us to see how we're handling our stress and our anxiety. Exploring your expectations for your student. Not that I would ever say that a parent has too high of an expectation for a student, but sometimes the parents' expectations for the students can cause a lot of stress and anxiety. And so I think just talking to your students about how they're feeling about their own expectations and your expectations for them. Then we have the students who sometimes the parents don't really put the expectations on the students, and then the students somehow put their own high expectations on themselves. So just having that conversation about, what are our expectations for you as far as school goes. Emphasizing self-care with them, structuring their days. I actually have a daughter who's a senior this year who was diagnosed with anxiety as a middle school student, and she has learned over the past 6 years to really manage her anxiety. One of the things that I noticed when she is struggling more is that she is not taking care of herself. She is not getting enough sleep. She is not eating the right food. She is not doesn't have downtime. She's not exercising. So helping them understand why it's important to take care of yourself, and then helping them structure their days so that they have downtime. They have some time that they can step away from stressful things. Validating and showing empathy without agreeing with their fears. So when students come and see me, often they will say, my parents just dismiss how I'm feeling, or they are not listening to me. I think validating that they are feeling anxious or that they are feeling stressed is important, right? That doesn't necessarily mean that we have to agree that they should be feeling anxious or stressed, but that is just the way that they are feeling. So validating that without agreeing with their fears, if that makes sense. Challenge that in helpful thinking. Encourage positive self-talk. This is something that I talk to the students a lot about, is that sort of voice in your brain that helps you feel more positively if you're stressed or you're feeling anxious about something, right? That positive self-talk. Discuss the fears and the what-ifs with your students. If they are fearful about something, if they have a presentation coming up and they have a lot of anxiety about that, talk to them about that and go through the what-ifs. Okay, so you have this presentation. What if you get up and you get lost midway, right? So talk about sort of what if that happens, okay? Because that kind of helps them deal with that fear. Don't allow avoidance. This is something that I, even as a counselor, have had to learn really in working with these students. It's not to really allow them to avoid. So I do have a large number of students who will come in and have a math test today and I'm not prepared, right? So instead of allowing them to avoid the test, which I might have done as a younger counselor, I talk to them about, okay, when is your test? What free periods do you have? How can we talk to the teacher and maybe see if they'll give you an extension through the day? but not to allow them to avoid that. And what that does is, even if they are unsuccessful on the assessment, it still has them move through that anxiety, right? So even if they did not do well, they can see, okay, I can move through the anxiety and take the assessment even though I might not have done well. Excuse me, sorry. Building self-confidence. Have your student do things that build their self-confidence. If they are not particularly strong academically, involve them in extracurriculars. Find out what their hobbies are. Find out what they feel really successful when they are doing. They need to be confident in all areas of their life, not just academics. So we want to make sure we're promoting well-rounded children. Seek professional help if anxiety is interfering with the ability to function and quality of life. Kind of talked about that. Okay, so what do we do with our students who have anxiety? Again, focusing on self-care, right? Nutrition, sleep, physical activity, structure. Avoiding the use of substances. Okay, this is really important. Students who have anxiety are more prone to use substances as a way to self-medicate. So that is why it's very important as parents that we address the anxiety and treat it appropriately so that our students are not turning to substances to make themselves feel better. Prioritizing time management, avoiding procrastination, which is hard even for adults. Recognizing and challenging their anxiety, talked about that. We've got breathing and other exercises. So lots of times I have students with anxiety who overthink, right? They worry a lot. And so what I will talk to them about is the concept of having a mental box. And you've got this mental box, and I'm not telling you that you have to let go of your worry, right? That you have to dismiss it completely, but you need to be able to function during the day or during, your day. So open that mental box, put that worry in that box, close it up, move on with your day, and then if you feel like you need to revisit it, open it back up, bring it out, think about it for a little bit, put it back away. Sometimes just giving them the opportunity to say, I don't have to let go of this worry, that I can keep it, but I don't have to focus on it right now, is helpful. Grounding. I even had a counselor with a former student who really, really struggled with anxiety, and her grounding exercise from her counselor was she had to go outside and find a spider. And just to get her outside of her head about what she was thinking about as far as her anxiety goes. Positive self-talk, again, I talked about that. Social media is a huge thing with our students, we know that. I think limiting social media use, especially in the younger ages, is very, very important. Once they get into high school, a lot of what we see, especially with females, is fear of missing out. They call that FOMO. And that's really honestly something that it's legitimate. When you see groups of friends from school or outside of school who are getting together and doing things and you're not included, and they continue to share those pictures, right? It's always in their face. And so it's hard for them to not understand why they're not included, right? And so if we can limit their social media use, that's important. Hokey counseling, yes, but journaling can be very helpful. Writing down your triggers, writing down how you reacted, how you're going to resolve that, or even gratitude journaling can be really, really important, really helpful. And again, reaching out for help if the student feels the anxiety is unmanageable. Okay, how do we treat it? So I have the pleasure of working with the 9th through 12th graders. Oftentimes what gets them in my office the most is the physical component of anxiety, of the physical manifestation. They may have some social anxiety, they may have some OCD or things like that. What is the most uncomfortable is what gets them in my office, which is the headaches and the stomach aches and all of those things. And so they can come to us. We all have screenings in our office, anxiety, depression, ADHD screenings. We can do those. If you have a mental health provider that you use, certainly reach out to them. We can make referrals from our office as well. I always encourage the parents to give the student an active role in selecting their mental health professional, right? So I might send 4 or 5 options, and I tell the parent, have the student read their bios and see who they feel like they're going to connect with the most. That gives them some ownership. You would schedule an intake interview and a screening with that person. The counselor is going to determine the best course of treatment. A lot of times when I'm talking to parents, they will say things like, we're not going to use any medication. Well, we don't want you to go straight to medication. What we would like for you to do is work with a mental health professional to develop some strategies for your student in coping with their anxiety. And then if those are not fully helpful, then we might look at medication. But again, that's something that is a family decision and a counselor decision and all of those things.
I want to thank you for coming out today. We really appreciate your time. I hope you enjoyed the lunch. I hope you enjoyed the presentation.